Thank you very much. I have to say this is actually, I speak quite often in public now, in the States Assembly and so on, but actually this is a slightly more intimidating audience because I can often feel in the States Assembly, I think I can look around here and say this without too much fear, but you know, I sometimes feel I do know quite a bit about my subject relative to the people I'm talking to in the Assembly, but unfortunately I can't say that here. I think I have to accept that there are people here who know a lot more about the subjects we're talking about, and so it is a little more intimidating. I am indeed Minister for the Environment, and it's only about a year or so ago that I entered politics, and it's obviously been an interesting journey. There was a Facebook post the other day saying that the problem with politicians is that once they get elected, they forget all their promises and their principles, and they get addicted to the glamour and the power and all the rest of it. And I must say, that's not quite been my experience. There was a story a couple of months ago, I think it was, at Broad Street, which is where the government offices are. We have a changing room for the cyclists, and you meet the same people in there over and over again, and you have a bit of a banter, chat, and whatever. And then a couple of months ago, there was a guy in there I'd seen many times, and he started looking at me quizzically, and I had my clothes on, so don't worry. He started looking at me and he said, could I just ask, do you work for Jersey Statistics? So there's definitely a sense in which you need to keep yourself grounded. I'm not quite a household name yet, obviously. I did actually walk past him later on, and there was a poster on the wall with all the ministers with their names underneath it. So anyway. Thank you very much for the invite to come here today. So what am I going to talk about? Well, it's a bit of a sandwich I'm going to give you, I think. I've got a meaty bit in the middle and a sort of bit of sort of packaging around the outside. And so the first thing I'm going to do is a bit of framing. I want to frame what I've got to say in a bigger context by thinking about the significance of Jersey as an island. The second bit is about relevance. This is the real meat of it. I'll talk a bit about ways in which the Société is still powerfully relevant to the island, particularly from my point of view as a Minister for the Environment. And finally, I'm going to set out some perhaps bigger thoughts about how the Société might position itself beyond the kind of nuts and bolts of the work that all the sections do, and a vision, if you like. So first of all, framing. So I was going to start here with a film, a Horizon film that I made, because 20 years ago I made a film about Easter Island. That's the island with the famous Moai statues. You probably know about it. Some of you may know the outlines of the story, that it was an amazing civilization, most visible form of which was those giant statues, those giant stone statues. But then it was alleged the whole civilization collapsed. And it's usually seen as a classic case of ecological overexploitation. Jared Diamond popularised that in a book. The islanders overexploited their resource base, and this led to ecological collapse, breakdown of their society, warfare, starvation, even cannibalism. And at this point, I would have actually shown a clip from about 2/3 of the way through the film, but a few weeks ago I got a scary email from Rebecca asking us to ensure we had copyright clearance. And so I decided not to show a clip of the film. But I'm going to quote from it, and so you'll have to imagine the music and the special effects and all of that. So this was a bit midway through the film, and the contributor at this point says, "My explanation for the collapse of Easter Island society is ecological disaster. That's to say, everything went wrong with the ecology of the island, and the reason for that was people. It was a man-made ecological disaster." Then you had the narrator, deep voice, music, choral, very dramatic. Easter Island society, it seemed, had self-destructed. For many scientists, the story of Easter Island's collapse was nothing less than a parable for the whole world. Easter Island's fall came to be seen as a terrible ecological warning from history. So this clip introduces two thoughts. There's the obvious ecological message, mess up our environment and we mess up our own civilization. But the other thought that this part of the film develops is islands as a metaphor. This is not a new one, of course, but it stems from the observation that to a greater or lesser extent, islands are mini-worlds in their own right. The sea sets physical boundaries, and depending on the remoteness and size of the island, the contained nature of the territory allows for what you might call natural experiments, whether that's experiments in evolution or in natural evolution or human evolution. And Easter Island is perhaps the most extreme example of the isolated island as social experiment, because genetics tells us that in all probability there was just one wave of human settlement, perhaps just one or two rafts of Stone Age Polynesians who came around 2,000 miles across the Pacific to colonise the island. So this was a real life, Lord of the Flies, if you like, or Garden of Eden, if you prefer. Jersey is not as pure a metaphor as that. But nevertheless, that idea of islands as metaphors gives small islands a power over the collective imagination that goes well beyond their relative insignificance in size. What happens here does matter. Can we deliver net zero at the same time as improving living standards? Can we manage a just transition? Can we continue to develop our economy whilst promoting biodiversity net gain, doing more than protection, but also repair and enhancement? I think these are powerful ways in which Jersey can have an influence in the wider world. So I'm going to return to that idea, this islands as metaphors idea, later on, because it turns out there are lots of different ways of interpreting the Easter Island story, and I think by exploring that a bit further, we can see a way in which the Société can think about its place in island life. But I want to move on to talk more directly about the obvious way in which the Société remains relevant in island life. I've had some very interesting conversations with my colleagues in the Natural Environment Department about the role of the Société, because I asked them actually to tell me what interactions they had and what they felt about that. And what emerges is an intricate and dense network of connections that I think are worth spelling out with a few examples. I've actually had to delete quite a few because it would have been quite a long list. And of course the Société was founded at a time when the idea of professional academic expertise was in its infancy. Knowledge came at that time from passionate enthusiasts, what we would probably call citizen scientists today. In Jersey, it was the Société, therefore, that built the island's knowledge base in terms of its geology, archaeology, botany, marine environment, and so on. The Société's role as curator of that vast and vital body of work was and remains crucial to our island identity. But the question is, what role is there for a research-based organisation in an era of highly professionalised scientific specialisation, when the knowledge base exists much more in academic institutions and other professionalised settings? Well, in the case of Jersey, quite a big one, as it turns out. In recent years, there's been extensive co-working between different sections of the Société and the Natural Environment Department. The relationship is sophisticated. It's based on an understanding of the government, an understanding that government is not going to deliver everything that the Société wants, and conversely, the Société won't do everything that we imagine it should in government. But generally, the relationship is based around the acquisition of knowledge. Government can often provide methodologies, frameworks, goals, or equipment for citizen science style projects which the sections are happy to be involved with. It's a symbiotic relationship in the sense that it's nurtured and promoted generations of students and others who've gone on to work in the Environment Department. In terms of the future, the Société is the main repository for island-based knowledge, with most of Jersey's experts being members of one or more of its sections. As an institution, the Société is almost unique as it binds together an enormous range of talent in one place that would otherwise be hard to access. Many aspects of government, it's fair to say, many aspects of government decision-making would struggle to function without access to the Société and its membership. So how does that play out in practice? Here are some examples provided by my colleagues. Of course, there's the Biological Records Centre, which was a government project but is hosted and facilitated here. Researching and quantifying the sea lettuce problem has been done by the Marine Biology section in cooperation with the Natural Environment team. The Seabed Habitat Mapping work to establish the marine protected areas around the ecrihos and minkies involved the marine biology section. And the establishment of the Portlet no-take zone rose from a Société proposition through the Marine Resources Panel, which the Minister at that time asked the department to take forwards. And I sit on that Marine Resources Panel now, along with members of the Société. Many members of the Société, especially the entomology section, are part of the butterfly and moth monitoring schemes, collecting data sets for the department. The members of the zoology section are also members of the Jersey Joint Amphibian and Reptile Group and the Jersey Bat Group, which also play an important role in monitoring different species. The Société has published books which are based on reports that the government has researched. And the recent revision of the wildlife law required extensive consultation with the Société, especially around the inclusion and status of individual species because of the knowledge that was held here. And so it goes on. Overall, arching all of this, I'd say that in government we see the knowledge held within the Société as expert knowledge of a quality that would stand shoulder to shoulder with national and international experts. And an important point I'd add here is that local knowledge is particularly important because of our uniqueness as an island. This is especially important given the island's proximity and interrelationship with mainland Europe, which means that UK consultants are not necessarily able to understand our situation. We can't just import knowledge in. We are, in a way, a borderland. We have a very unique position, and therefore we need that unique knowledge. So how does this fit in with my ministerial agenda? Well, the Common Strategic Policy, which this government published when we first came in, says that we will protect and enhance our environment for future generations. We will preserve our natural heritage and move towards a zero-waste circular economy. We will improve biodiversity, water, air and soil quality, and will continue our drive to reduce carbon emissions in line with the Carbon Neutral Roadmap. And the Carbon Neutral Roadmap itself recognises the importance of tackling the climate emergency by using nature-based solutions that also address the biodiversity crisis. And then there's the Island Plan, which I also hold ministerial responsibility for, which has a very important commitment that I, as Minister, will undertake work to determine how the concept of biodiversity net gain and an urban greening factor can be developed and implemented as part of the legal framework in Jersey. I think it's pretty easy to see how the work of the Société can weave in and through these priorities. And I really welcome the involvement of the Société in helping to shape the policies and laws and strategies that will emerge out of this work. So where does this leave us regarding the future of the Société? Self-evidently, given what I've just said, there is a strong influential role for the Société in the future development of the island's environment. But can it go further than that? So far I've talked about the nuts and bolts. What might a vision be? Is there something bigger we can say? Something that will capture the imagination of islanders and stir the soul? Let me take you back to Easter Island. If you remember, I started by saying that Easter Island was a parable of eco-collapse, the type case of a society that destroyed its own environment, leading to the collapse of their society. When I made this film, it was an interesting point in my career. I was learning how to make science films for Horizon that would essentially turn information into story. In other words, to take what you might consider to be dry science and turn it into something entertaining. We used classic Hollywood storytelling techniques, inciting incidents, 3-act structures, and so on, the details of which needn't concern us here. But the key transition for me, as a filmmaker, was to learn to take control of the narrative. The narrative of a film is not just a timeline. It is not a natural sequence of events that emerges from the information when you've done your research. A narrative is something that you, as a filmmaker, grab hold of and shape. You own it. You decide what to include and what to leave out. You decide the order in which to tell the story. You decide whether to withhold a piece of information until it can have maximum storytelling power. All of this is easy to say, But in practice, I found that it took a degree of confidence to arrive at the point where I could actually do it. You have to be prepared to take responsibility for the narrative you choose. Is it justified by the facts? People will disagree with it for sure. You are making a choice about your version of the story, and it has to be defendable, but it is still your narrative. In the case of Easter Island, I decided that eco-collapse wasn't the main reason for the main part of the story. The facts didn't fit. When the first Westerners arrived in 1722, there was no signs of social stress. The statues were standing. There was no starvation. But in a sign of things to come, the Dutch arrivals killed around 12 islanders. The pulling down of the statues post-dated first Western contact. There was a period after the first Western contact, but before large-scale interaction between the West and the people there, in which their society does seem to have gone through some kind of crisis. And it probably did have an ecological component. But they recovered from that crisis, because when Western contact began in earnest, 100 years or so after first contact, Easter Island society was thriving. What really led to Easter Island's collapse was Western contact. It was that terrible, wearily familiar story, essentially, of genocide. Westerners carted off most of the able-bodied islanders' slaves and imported TB and smallpox. So it wasn't just an eco-collapse. So I concluded the film with these words, that I said there were two stories essentially about Easter Island, and in a way both stories are true. The rise and fall of one of the most amazing civilizations on earth is a story of epic human achievement intermixed with terrible folly. It is, in other words, the story of the whole of human history. That was my voice, my decision. I owned that narrative. I wanted to say something that recognised the resilience of Easter Islanders. And this is where I would urge the Société to do some creative thinking. And that can operate at two levels. First, what is your narrative? What story do you want to tell about the Société? There are, various archetypes in storytelling, archetypal story types, and one of them is a rebirth story or a resurrection story. Maybe that's one you could play with at the Société, a golden period, then a period of whatever you want to call it, retrenchment or whatever. Where are we going now? Where's that leap forward? How can the Société re-establish its centrality in island life? That's a narrative that only you can flesh out. But also, what role does the Société want to play in shaping the narrative of Jersey? We have some big, big choices ahead of us. We have to confront an ageing population, pressure to increase economic growth, pressure to develop more land. We have to find a way of reconciling these ambitions. The Société can choose how much it wants to get involved in these debates, and I appreciate these are difficult choices. I would say that as a learned society, whatever narratives the Société develops need to be grounded in knowledge, in the knowledge base. It is not a think tank. But the Société's distinctive take on what role our unique heritage, our natural environment, our geology can play in shaping our future would be interesting to hear. I would relate it to a quote from the former economic advisor to the States, the late and much missed Colin Powell. In his famous economic survey of Jersey from 1971, he wrote an almost throwaway line: "Jersey has prospered as an independent unit on the basis of differences with surrounding territories." He was thinking mostly of constitutional and taxation issues, but I would argue that these political differences are underpinned and have to remain underpinned by a cultural, historic and scientific foundation, by a wider appreciation of our difference. Can you inspire a new generation of citizen scientists, of enthusiasts for Jersey's unique environment and history? 50 years ago, my father, who's sitting in the front row, ran the youth section of Jersey, and I know that some people in this room were inspired by that. And I certainly remember it being dragged out. I mean, going out and enjoying all those walks. What's the equivalent project today? To my mind, the Société's mission needs to be to carry a flame for the uniqueness of Jersey and to build that on the decades of knowledge that is curated here, but to keep fueling the flame with an inspirational vision of how deep, curated knowledge of Jersey's specialness can be woven into our future. How Jersey squares the circle of economic development, social justice, environmental improvement, and heritage protection will define our future and offer a story to the world. I firmly believe the Société has a central role to play in that story. Thank you.